Good evening. Welcome to Northbeat. I'm Megan Roberts. We begin in Yellowknife, where a fire that destroyed 12 homes last fall is now being investigated as a potential criminal act. The RCMP confirmed to CBC today it has taken over the investigation of the Garden Townhomes fire. Sarah Kromolowski has more.
Across the street, just behind us, are the remains of 12 three-bedroom homes, all wiped out by fire. The area is still fenced off. And now RCMP are in charge of finding out what happened at the Garden Townhomes complex last October, taking over from the Northwest Territories Fire Marshal's office. Neighbors who saw the fire say it started in one unit early in the morning. The blaze spread quickly. No one was injured, but within hours, all the units were destroyed. But how did the fire start? For months, the Northwest Territories Fire Marshal led the investigation into what caused the fire. Based on evidence from the Fire Marshal's office, police are investigating the cause as a, quote, potential criminal act. RCMP didn't say what the evidence was that led them to take over the investigation, but a spokesperson said that officers have been actively investigating since the start of the month. Sarah Kromolowski, CBC News, Yellowknife.
The government of the Northwest Territories is planning for an earlier start to the wildfire season. It's happening as overwintering or zombie fires continue to smolder underground. The CBC's Mahnur Mubarak has that story.
Holdover fires are going to be assessed earlier than usual this spring, a head start in hopes of snuffing the fires out that continue to burn under ice and snow. Jay McDonald is the NWT Minister of Environment and Climate Change. He says because of drought and climate change, there is a need to be proactive when dealing with those fires, and that's going to happen.
There's a plan to do aerial as well as drone scanning early in the spring, as well as having staff on the ground also doing assessments on fires.
McDonald said one overwintering fire close to Paradise Gardens had people there on edge because of the amount of smoke it produced, bothering some residents. Workers jumped into action, cut off the fire supply to oxygen, smothering it. The other overwintering fires in the NWT are being monitored, and there are key areas that are being observed closely. Those include around Enterprise, the Hay River Corridor, and Highway 3 between Betchico and Yellowknife. None of them are a surprise.
Overwintering fires are to be expected after a large burn year like we saw last year. Certainly we had our most severe fire season of all time. So the fact that this is occurring is not a surprise. It is something that we are monitoring very closely and ready to take action as appropriate.
One researcher studies these types of fires and says they are tied to climate change.
It's changing. We're seeing more severe fires. We're seeing larger area burned. We're seeing more frequent fires, longer fire seasons. And this component of overwintering fire behavior is one of those features that we're seeing that is all part and parcel of the changing climate.
The speed of the snowpack melt can affect the upcoming wildfire season. A faster melt means faster evaporation and dry soil, which increases the level of wildfire danger. That means fingers crossed for a slow and drawn-out melt, which keeps the soil wet and cold, nature's way of firefighting. Mahnur Mubarak, CBC News, Yellowknife.
Wildfires are front of mind in the NWT Legislative Assembly as well. Yesterday, a majority of MLAs voted in favor of having an inquiry into last year's wildfires and evacuations. But the NWT Premier said shortly after the vote that he would not entertain the idea until at least after this year's season. Today, MLA Julian Morris asked the Premier about his comments. Here's that back and forth.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday members made a number of statements suggesting open collaboration between the regular side and cabinet, suggestions for ways to move forward. I certainly made some statements to that effect myself. And then we saw the Premier turn around and go to the media after the motion was passed and state that they don't plan to listen. Mr. Speaker, is it the Premier and Cabinet's intent to simply ignore the calls for collaboration and suggestions made by myself and my colleagues?
No, that is not my intention. I have a responsibility when the House brings forward a motion and recommendations to carefully consider those. I also have a responsibility to ensure that we are operating the government in a responsible manner. I think there's a lot of information that there's a lot of assumptions about what a public inquiry is. Even yesterday, even after I tried to clarify some of the facts around what we can and can't do, there were still assumptions remaining. There was comparisons of our Inquiries Act to the Federal Inquiries Act without taking into account the other federal acts that interact with the Federal Public Inquiries Act and allow them to set budgets. There were comments about the independence of certain other reports. So there's a lot of these things that, that as the government, when we do something, we actually need to know the facts. We actually have to do research. We have to look into things. It's a lot more than just standing up in the House and saying something. There's a lot of work behind the scenes. So we need to do that work, Mr. Speaker, and we intend on doing that work.
Yesterday, I spoke to difficulty engaging with constituents on the proposal that the Cabinet had brought forward. Mr. Speaker, why has the Premier not made their proposal and scope of work public so the public can assess it for themselves and decide if it passes muster?
It can be difficult to negotiate in public and through the media, and so when we are trying to work with the members, we want to avoid that type of noise that comes with that. It is a difficult balance. I get where the member is coming from. I struggled with that as a regular member, but the fact is that we are elected to do that work on behalf of constituents. So sometimes the constituents don't have all of the information, but they've appointed us to look at that information and make our best judgments. But I understand where the member is coming from. It's a constant battle between keeping too much confidential and releasing too much in the public at inappropriate times.
Is it the Premier's position that we're still in a negotiation with privacy concerns? I'm just trying to get an understanding for why a draft terms of reference or scope of work couldn't just simply be made public so the public can assess it for themselves. I know when BC did this, their draft terms of reference was on their website. Can the Premier give some substantiation for why it needs to be done in confidentiality?
There's procurement issues, so I don't have an answer that I think would be sufficient right now on the tip of my tongue. So I'm happy to get back to the member with a written response. Thank you.
That was NWT Premier R.J. Simpson responding to questions from MLA Julian Morse in the Legislative Assembly today. Now, the Legislative Assembly is also sitting in Nunavut right now. Today is day 2, and MLAs raised the issue of bullying in schools, along with questions about interventions and awareness training. The CBC's Jody Nyocha has that story.
MLA for Ivy League Solomon Maliki asked how the government of Nunavut is taking action to raise awareness to eliminate bullying in schools. He says some children are afraid to go to school and the damage from bullying can last a lifetime.
Mr. Speaker, the impact of one student bullying other student can scar for children's life. Feeling unsupported or put down by peer groups can be devastating. It can change a nice young person into someone that you almost don't recognize anymore.
Maliki says not only children are being bullied by other students, but a case in front of the court raises fears that educators are also mistreating the youth in the schools. An issue highlighted by a former teacher at Saku School in Coral Harbor, scheduled to appear in court on Monday on charges of assault. Minister of Education Pamela Gross says they are using the violent reporting system, which is in its first year of implementation.
We want them to all be importing their information so that we have accurate data that goes into the system so that we can utilize it very efficiently.
The program allows educators and school employees to report violent incidents. Jody Ningachel, CBC News, Iqaluit.
The safety of power plants in Nunavut was also raised in the territory's legislature this week, alongside concerns of what would happen if Iqaluit experienced a long-term power outage. Earlier this month, Iqaluit residents thought the power plant caught fire. The emergency response team was called in after receiving reports of smoke. Goodlick Energy Corporation said the smoke was not caused by fire, but by problems with 2 generators. MLA George Hicks wants to know what would happen to Iqaluit if the plant were to fail.
When we look at a catastrophic failure in a city the size of Iqaluit, there may not be enough shelters in place that have self-generation heating ability. Before last summer, probably very few of us could fathom a mass evacuation event, such as what happened with our neighbors to the west.
The minister responsible for Goodlick Energy Corporation is John Main. He says the corporation keeps the plants up to date to avoid such failures. And he says that's especially true right now when power plants across Nunavut are past their lifespan. Main says they're planning to invest $8 million to keep power reliable across the territory, including in Iqaluit. 15 log homes are nearly complete in the Liard First Nation in Watson Lake, Yukon. The homes were built by residents through the community's own manufacturing plant and funded by the federal government. Chief Stephen Charlie says citizens who need it most will move in first, but it's not up to him to decide who's eligible.
I don't decide that. It is put into a housing committee, and the housing committee right now looks at need. And I don't want any of our First Nation children going into foster care.
Charlie says the community's 9-unit elders home is expected to be move-in ready by the end of spring. In the future, he hopes to see up to 120 new log homes built yearly with the help of federal funding. Police in Edmonton have solved 2 missing person cases dating back 5 decades. Both involve Indigenous women. The CBC's Julia Wong reports on the 2 cases and the initiative that solved them.
There is some closure for the families of 2 Indigenous women who were found dead in Edmonton in the 1970s, but whose remains were not identified until now. Project Match is an initiative of the Edmonton Police Service, and it began last fall when police reviewed their historic unidentified human remains cases. With the oversight of elders, the bodies of 2 Indigenous women were exhumed and DNA was extracted. And through that, police were able to identify these 2 people. One was Louise Laderoux, who was found dead in a local river. Police say she drowned and her death was not suspicious. The other was Irene Jackknife, who died of medical causes outside. Police say her death was also not suspicious. Now, Laderoux's family tried to report her missing over the years, but police did not take that report until many decades later. Despite that, her family says the formal identification of her body brings some comfort, especially because they're able to give her a proper burial now.
Just know that I love her and I missed her for all these years, but I'd like to see her remains or another reburial, if possible, because we have our family plot in St. Albert, and I'd like her to be with them. It would mean a lot because I wanted to tell her how much I missed her and how much I love her.
We had some oversights there. I like to believe they did the best they could. At the time, I wasn't there, so I can't speak for them. But we made mistakes, and we've changed our processes since then. And we have very robust processes now.
Edmonton police say they have 18 other unidentified human remains. The police chief here says they will not rest when it comes to these cases, saying they will use all types of technology, including AI. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
This week, the Fifth Estate is tackling the ongoing issue of food prices. It's examining the idea of a code regulating dealings between grocers and suppliers, and why suppliers say it's necessary. Here's a preview from Stephen D'Souza.
Consumers are clearly upset with the high cost of food, but many companies that make the products on these shelves say they're feeling the squeeze too.
There's very few, if any, people in the supply chain who are willing to actually speak out against the practices with retailers for fear of some form of negative reaction or retribution.
What's the worst case scenario?
Complete removal from store shelves.
That's why we're concealing the supplier's identity. They manufacture a snack sold at a major grocer. The supplier says grocers charge them for everything, from placing products on store shelves to delivery and packaging problems, a system called chargebacks.
They tend to often seem like they're made up. to pad sometimes their profits.
The supplier says a big grocer once raised the price of their product by $2, money that wouldn't come back to them.
Definitely upset because it wouldn't sell at that price. And if it doesn't sell, like I said, I'm liable. It would hurt me in my business.
The proposed grocery code of conduct is meant to address this, to bring fairness and transparency between suppliers and the big grocers.
We just need to sign a code that doesn't increase the risk of higher food prices to Canadians.
Loblaw has warned a code could lead to empty shelves and could potentially add over $1 billion in cost for consumers.
We had a few scare stories like that in the UK, and none of it actually came into effect.
Christine Taken oversaw compliance for the UK's version of the grocery code. She says the code helped eliminate many of the extra charges grocers imposed on suppliers.
One of the retailers said they found out they had 30 different ways of charging suppliers for things, and then by the time they'd finished looking at all the issues that I was raising, they'd got down to 3.
So far, Metro and Empire, which own Sobeys, are in favor of the code. And while the code isn't meant to directly lower prices, that did end up happening in the UK. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Toronto.
The Innovatum contest is open. You can read, speak, sing, or do a skit in the dialect of your choice. And you can even use filters like this one. Una nutchuk. Buvraganetuk. This is a seal. It's going to swim.
When my grandfather, Charlie Chaplin, first arrived in Hollywood, it was a place of dreams. But my grandfather clashed with some very powerful forces in America.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Stand away from the stand!
I'm Una Chaplin. This is Hollywood Exiles. It's about a war of ideas that tore apart friendships, ended careers, and affected families like mine.
Hollywood Exiles, available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
Does public transit really need more police officers? And so this is it.
Welcome to the Greenbelt.
It is now believed that Titan was destroyed.
It makes sense that they get a larger share, or does it? All of this, just single detached homes.
Yes.
What do we know? How is that even possible? Well, with a little bit of help, I think we can explain it.
About that with Andrew Chang. Watch free on CBC Gem.
Bad hair days. We all have them.
Even as scientists. I think I know my place. It's not making art. What? This is a whale? That's incredible.
I'm piloting a boat in the fjords of Norway. I love this job.
You never listen to me.
You never think things through.
Their honeymoon phase is officially over. We never had a honeymoon phase.
You really gonna make me say it?
Oh, yeah.
Fine. I need you, Max.
So much drama. I love it. You ever get tired of that? Stop it. Get tired of that.
Hockey players from across the north are in Inuvik this weekend. The puck dropped last night on the first game of the IRC Native Hockey Tournament. It is the 35th year of this big event, and the CBC's Des Loreen was at the arena this afternoon.
I look forward to this weekend every year because it brings everybody together from the region, the Inuvialuit region, and some good hockey.
For some players and fans, this weekend is bigger than the Stanley Cup playoffs. 16 teams are playing in the tournament. There are teams from as far away as Whitehorse, Yukon, and Ulukhaktuk. Organizer Donald Hendrick has been involved with the tournament since it began 35 years ago.
Back then it was just local teams, Paltuk, like what we have this year. But back then, I never knew it would get this big, but it's sure growing over the years.
It's huge in the rink there. Anytime any one of the teams scores, you can hear the support from the fans and the support from the community, and so it's really big up here. I noticed that in Whitehorse too for the same kind of tournaments. Both of them, the community just rallies behind them, and they like to see it, and they like everybody to come up, and they like the show we put on. So
the final games are played on Sunday night. Games are also being live streamed on Facebook by the Inuvialuit Communications Society. Des Loreen, CBC News, Inuvik.
An unmanned spacecraft is on the lunar surface after experiencing some problems just before landing yesterday. Odysseus is the first commercial spacecraft to have landed on the moon in good condition. It is a big accomplishment for space travel and also for Canada. Kayla Hounsell explains.
Houston, Odysseus has found his new home.
After a few tense moments in mission control, with flight controllers scrambling to solve a last-minute problem with the navigation system.
I know this was a nail biter, but we are on the surface and we are transmitting. And welcome to the moon.
NASA announces what it calls another giant step forward for mankind.
Today, for the first time in more than a half century, the U.S. has returned to the moon. Today, for the first time in the history of humanity, a commercial company, an American company, launched and led the voyage up there.
And liftoff.
The unmanned Nova-C lunar lander, the Odysseus, launched from the Kennedy Space Center 7 days ago, taking these photos along the way.
Everything that we learn from being able to succeed there brings back benefits to Earth.
On board are Canadian cameras, Eagle Cam, designed to deploy right before landing to take the first ever selfie of a lander touching down, and another that could capture the first images of the Milky Way from the lunar surface.
And it'll be the first for the scientists, for the engineers, but also for the public to see how it is to land on the surface of the moon.
On touchdown, the lander was transmitting, but its status wasn't immediately clear. Other countries have successfully landed unmanned spacecraft. A Japanese one landed earlier this year, but ran out of power shortly after. Experts say all attempts are building toward the ultimate mission of sending people back to the moon.
Jeremy Hansen.
The Artemis II mission, in which Jeremy Hansen will make history as the first Canadian to travel to the moon.
We've learned a lot from the Apollo missions, but we've now got even more questions driving us to go back.
Other companies are also planning to send spacecraft to the moon, but right now, all eyes are on the Odysseus to see what it can achieve. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
Scientists this week observed 3 large solar flares, or bursts of radiation from the sun, and the largest was yesterday. In fact, it was the largest since 2017. Solar flares can disrupt radio communications and power grids, and they also cause the northern lights, but only when accompanied by slower waves of magnetic energy. And that didn't happen this time. The number of solar flares rise and fall in an 11-year cycle, and that cycle will be in its peak in the coming months. The Rendezvous Winter Festival is still going strong in Whitehorse, and snow sculptors are carving and chiseling their way into the weekend after a warm spell. It was a relatively brisk -5 degrees Celsius this morning. That's actually the coldest it's been all week. And carvers are now working double time in slushy conditions, hustling to catch up on work lost to warm weather.
It's been difficult. It's been, we did one last year and it was the polar opposite. It was too cold and windy, and this year it's very soggy and it's a little bit discouraging. However, I think we're doing all right.
Today and the day before it was like mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
So by about 3 o'clock, you don't even want to touch it.
Yeah, we went home and waited until this morning and came back when it was colder.
It was really tough for a few days there. It was about +7, +5. So yeah, carving in water. It was tough for a few days, but nighttime, come in and carve at nighttime, and today's a nice day for it. We got a little bit below 0, so hopefully she hangs on, stays cold.
The snow sculptures will be on display over the weekend at the park. There will also be axe throwing, chainsaw chuck, and log toss competitions. That is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, you can always go to our website, cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a great weekend.
Closing this case gets you one step closer to you getting back on the squad and keeping you out of prison.
You're not a detective. You're a con artist. You have a driver's license, right?
Of course, I have 9. If you couldn't be a cop, what would you be?
Nothing. My dad raised me to be a cop. That's who I am. Stay here.
You're adorable.
You guys are making this entire station look like a circus.
He's busy trying to solve a murder. What are you doing?
Thanks for having my back.
Look at you.
Is this your girlfriend? This is not my girlfriend.
She's way too cool to be your girlfriend.
She's not way too cool to be my girlfriend.
Nineteen 40 dalawam 50 saling urak luwang kalawang jambak tualo lakalawam pilaktok talo ama wakalaw yalak simutan sibulak pak pilaktok tao ama pilakta simalak simuglak talo simugama.
My name is Amanda Paris, and I am constantly thinking about culture, race, and social issues. So I want to push these conversations forward.
We found that there was animal meat fat in plastic synthetic hair.
There was a time where I'm like, should I have kids because the kids are going to be black?
I've been fired from my dream job. What's the worst that can happen now?
Now is the time to take the group chat to the real world. A 6-part series. This is For the Culture.
Watch free on CBC Gem.
Hey, you're some friends, aren't you? Stand here and now you try and blackmail her. You disgust me. Every one of you.
Coronation Street. Watch free on CBC Gem.
Treaty in Cree is Naskomitoin, an oral agreement. And our agreements were always spoken. For George Spence, the core of treaty was Wichihioin, to help one another.
And so we, the commissioners,
He was there for the making of Treaty 9, where the Cree were told,
we will honor this agreement together for as long as the sun shines and the waters flow.
The Cree made their mark because they were assured that the land would be shared, and they would always be able to harvest what they needed. George Spence was my great-grandfather. In his life, he saw many promises of the treaty go unfulfilled.
Treaties were essential to the creation of Canada. First Nations still fight for the agreements to be honored.
My grandfather, Charlie Chaplin, clashed with some very powerful forces in America.
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
I'm Una Chaplin. This is Hollywood Exiles.
News you can trust. Delivered when you want, where you want. On Canada's News app. Download the free CBC News app.